Epilogue. It really does get cold, Maomao thought. She had a light wrap around her shoulders, but she was still shivering. She was definitely regretting not having another cup of wine. It would have been warmer inside the building, but quite frankly, there was too much trouble in there. She worried about what would happen to the lion now that its nose was broken, but she wasn't feeling compassionate enough to help the big cat at the risk of being eaten herself. Yes, the lion was just a poor animal who'd been caged and put on display, but it had still attacked someone. Lahan had nonetheless thought it would be a waste not to try to fix the creature, and he'd attempted to get Maomao to do the job. Evidently, he saw the tousle-haired beast as another beautiful collection of numbers, and he wouldn't shut up about how the shattered nose disrupted that beauty. That was when she'd escaped out here. The sky seemed so vast. There was no moon, making the stars appear to shine all the brighter. 3 of them shone brightest of all, forming a triangle in the heavens. Perhaps those stars were the 2 lovers, and the river that separated them. I wish they'd hurry up and wrap things up in there. Maomao was just contemplating whether there might be a way for her to sneak back to Gyokuin's mansion when she heard footsteps behind her. Your honored cousin is looking for you. It's perfectly all right to just ignore him. So Maomao wasn't the only one who'd fled the hubbub. Don't you have more work to do? She asked. All right, so Basen had stolen the spotlight when the lion attacked, but surely this man could still be of some help. Are you hoping I'll drop dead from sheer overwork? Perish the thought, she said. Jinshi, who had indeed ducked away from his responsibilities, didn't seem to think her answer was entirely sincere. The wooden bench creaked softly as he sat down beside her. Then he set something between them. It appeared to be a piece of metal. Basen was right, Jinshi said. It was weak. Quality iron would have held together better. There were a number of ways of casting iron, and if you got it wrong, the inside could turn out hollow, weakening the structure. It's almost like someone wanted it to break. An unsettling idea. There was something Maomao had been wondering about as well. The way the lion had gone straight for Consort Lishu, as if specifically targeting her. It had seemed to ignore Maomao in favor of the consort. Just because it was starving? She thought. That was a possibility. Maybe because she had been holding meat? Another possibility. But Maomao couldn't stop thinking about the perfume the consort had been doused in. Something so pungent would certainly have been detectable to a wild animal. What if that was what had attracted the lion's attention? Maomao sat and thought silently. Hey, don't just go quiet, Jinshi said after a moment. He should have known very well by now that Maomao rarely initiated a conversation. Why had he decided to sit by her anyway? He should stop slacking and get back to work already. I suppose you're wishing I would just get back to work, said Jinshi. Me, sir? Never. He did know what she was thinking occasionally. That was the trouble with him. Maomao had to work very hard to pretend that her face didn't want to convulse into a major scowl. If I went back, one of 2 things would happen. Either I would have to work, or I would be mobbed by women. The less popular men in the world might call for your head to hear you complain about such things. Men who had money and status and looks to boot were just different. A moonless night like this, he ought to be more careful. What they're really after is the imperial blood, don't you think? Jinshi said. Meaning his children, she supposed. Or perhaps his life. I should think at least half of it is your looks, sir. Don't say that. Jinshi frowned as if he'd eaten a particularly unpleasant bug. For some reason, even though he possessed beauty beyond virtually anyone Maomao had ever seen, he seemed to have some kind of inferiority complex about it. His fingers brushed the scar on his cheek. The stain on his beauty was lamented by all and sundry, yet was it her imagination, or did he almost seem fond of it? Maomao, quite honestly, wasn't offended by the scar. No human was perfect, and Jinshi's appearance had been so flawless that it had belied what was within. What was wrong with this modest alteration to the appearance he'd been born with? Anyway, a scar it might have been, but Maomao's father had stitched it up, and he'd naturally done an excellent job. Each time Maomao had applied salve or makeup to Jinshi's cheek, which was not infrequently, she'd felt the wound growing less pronounced under her fingers. I would rather say my face had been burned and continue wearing that makeup, Jinshi said. Eventually the color would cease to come out, sir. But if it's a burn you want, I'd be happy to help you. She could use him as a test subject for her burn medications at the same time. Stop that. After 20 days of wearing the makeup, a faint patch of red dye could still be seen on Jinshi's cheek. He'd been using a dusting of white powder to conceal it. If I were actually burned, I think Gaoshun might collapse. But I admit it would be easier in its own way. The makeup is certainly somewhat troublesome. I found myself rather relaxed during this trip, though. He seemed to be referring to the fact that no town girl would willingly make a move on a gloomy man with a burn on his face, and at the same time, he was free of his usual desk work. Meanwhile, Maomao had felt that there had been nothing to do but watch the scenery roll by from the carriage window as her behind got sorer and sorer. Just the thought of the trip home was enough to depress her. "Would you like to work on your horsemanship? I know you're getting tired of the carriage," he said. "Yes, but I would rather just have a proper bed." She'd worked on hers during the trip. The problem was that she'd rarely had a chance to use it, since other people, very pleased with her work, always seemed to be lying there instead. "Ah, yes, I hope you'll be able to make it even more comfortable than before." A shock of annoyance ran through Maomao. Jinshi had been the biggest offender as far as stealing her sleeping space. He would ride horseback as far as he wanted, and when he was tired, he would come loll around. No wonder he thought it was relaxing. "It was His Majesty who told me to enjoy this trip," said Jinshi, with a slightly crooked smile. "And he told me to choose wisely." The choice he was referring to was probably choosing a bride, and for that purpose, maidens were gathered here. Whichever one he chooses, politics will be involved, which will affect the country's direction, strengthening ties with neighboring countries or which domestic forces to join hands with. Depending on who is chosen, his position will change. However, to hold this forum in the Western Province is a sign, to establish ties with the West. That's why Uryu brought his other daughter with him. Who would he choose? Whoever he chooses doesn't matter. Maomao just intended to act as an apothecary. That's what she intended, but... Just as she felt a touch on her fingertips, her hand was grabbed. Her captured hand was pressed palm to palm, fingers entwined with his. His hand was large and rough. His long fingers pressed on Maomao's hand, as if to prevent her from escaping. "Could you please let go of me?" "If I let go, won't you run off?" "What are you going to do that will make me want to run?" "Sometimes I want to hit you." Jinshi stared at Maomao like a beast hunting prey. He had the gaze of a starving dog that was neither of the eunuch Jinshi nor of the emperor's younger brother. It was the gaze of a completely different Jinshi. "Not the face, please. Somewhere where it can't be seen." "I won't actually hit you." "I know." Jinshi was not the type to lay a hand on women or children. No, he did lay a hand on her every time she tried a poison to force her to throw up. "At most, you held me in a headlock and forced me to empty my stomach." "That was your fault. Why did you eat poison?" "Even if you asked me why, I wouldn't know." It's easier to learn through experience than just by listening. Maomao's interests deviated from those of ordinary people, and her knowledge in those arenas made her appear smarter than others. And in Maomao's case, instead of knowledge, she lacked emotions compared to others. Although rarely, she still feels joy, anger, sorrow, and happiness. But there are some emotions that others normally have that she still didn't completely understand. The sound of Jinshi's pulse resonated through the palm of her hand, which was damp with sweat where they were touching. When she looked up, she saw long eyelashes lowered toward her, his dark obsidian eyes staring at Maomao. His face was so close that she could see her face reflected in those eyes. The courtesans had a saying, "Once you experience it, it will be hell." The men had a saying, "They come here to find it." That four-letter word that starts with L was sometimes said to be vulgar, sometimes dismissed as just a game, but there were also those who could not live without it. Jinshi's free hand reached out to Maomao's head. He ran his fingers through her hair, stopping at the back of her head. "You actually wore it." Jinshi had touched her hair that was pinned up by the hairpin. A hairpin with the motif of a silver moon and an opium poppy flower. She thought it was Lahan who prepared it, but it seems to be not the case. No wonder people were interested in the hairpin. "Was this from you, Master Jinshi? The moon is fine, but opium poppies... I'm not so sure." She remembered the White Lady. The opium poppy flower was a larger version of the common poppy flower, but it was used to make opium. "Don't say that. I had it made before the trip, to replace the one from before." Jinshi's voice came from directly above, his chin resting on top of Maomao's head. He toyed with her hair, twirling it around his fingertips, so close she could feel his breath. Any passerby would mistakenly think the two were sharing an intimate moment. "Master Jinshi, please let go of me." "Why?" "What would you do if someone saw us?" There were probably others who strayed from the banquet venue, like Maomao. This may be a blind spot behind the trees, but it was possible that someone may come by. There was no way this man, Jinshi, did not know the reason the banquet was being held. Master Jinshi, Consort Lishu is not your niece. You do not need to worry about being related by blood. Maomao stated it as a fact. Jinshi's expression tensed when he heard her words. Is she not the safest choice out of all the candidates? Let's forget the scene she just saw of Lady Lishu and Basen gazing deeply at each other. Let's forget it ever happened. Even if something were to blossom between them, it would be meaningless anyway. It would have been better if it had never happened. What do you mean, safe? Jinshi's voice cut like a cold blade next to Maomao's ear. Fingers that were playing with her hair now slid down Maomao's neck and circled her neck. His long fingers pressed on her neck. It hurts, sir. Oh, it hurts? I've been telling you it hurts. However, Jinshi's grip only grew stronger. He took his other hand, fingers still entwined with Maomao's, and twisted it behind her back. This idiot is going to dislocate my arm. Maomao frowned in pain, choking, and with one arm on the verge of being dislocated. She turned her face upward, mouth half open like a fish, trying to gasp a little bit more air. Jinshi looked down on her silly expression and... Maomao greedily inhaled the air she was given. The scent of flowers tickled her nostrils. Maomao thought the breath of a celestial nymph would smell of peaches, but it was jasmine. His thin lips felt hot and a bit dry. The hand that had constricted her neck now held the back of her head. The other hand now drew her waist closer. She couldn't tell how long they stayed like that. Maybe he thought his breath circulated through her whole body. He looked down at Maomao with a somewhat victorious expression. He wiped away the tears on Maomao's face from when she was struggling for breath. Maomao flared in irritation. I told you to use poison if you wanted to kill me. I won't let you do that. Jinshi responded while tracing Maomao's lips. Don't pretend you didn't realize that you were one of the candidates. I can tell you're trying to feign ignorance, Jinshi continued. Who was that man? You're not one to dance. So he was watching her. That's payment for a cheap drink. Maomao tried to look away, but he held her head in place. Thoughts of how to escape from the situation raced through her mind. How could I be of any use to you? Everyone here thinks that Lahan accompanied you here. Maomao understood what Jinshi was implying. This could also be what Lahan intended from the start. How irritating. He was going to get his toes stomped on later for this. The bloodline of the La clan is unique among that of the named clans. They did not belong to any faction, so she could also be considered as a safe option. It was as Riku-san said, with the exception of one thing. That man would become your enemy. That man referred to the monocled weirdo. If he were here today, what would have happened? There's no doubt he would cause a commotion the likes of which letting a lion loose from its cage would pale in comparison. As expected, Jinshi's face twitched, if only for a moment. I said we continue this later. Once again, Maomao was restrained and pushed down on the bench, crushing her hair arrangement. She could feel something other than his breath enter her mouth from his lips. She gazed into his beastly obsidian eyes up close. They shone brighter than any star, yet they were also dim. This man should be living a life of luxury, without want. Yet, occasionally, there was a hunger for something he was trying to sate. He should choose someone else. Surely there was someone out there who could give Jinshi what he was searching for. There were plenty who wanted to. There was no need to seek it from a living creature who lacked it. She wanted to run away. Something more troublesome and worrying was going to happen. She wanted to avoid trouble, but the piercing gaze of the stray dog would not allow her to escape. He was seeking something that didn't exist to devour it. Maomao could only stare back at him blankly. This only exacerbated the stray dog's anxiousness, and he continued to press down on Maomao more. I'm going to get crushed to death. A man twice Maomao's weight was on top of her. At times, courtesans had to handle customers 3 times their weight. Doesn't it hurt? If she were to complain about it, how could Paidin, the most experienced of the courtesans, respond? Even though they are the customer, you can't let them take the lead. Maomao remembered her saying that in a sultry manner back when Maomao was being taught the ways of the courtesans. Truthfully, it may be better if she remained still, like a doll, and accepted it. Or maybe it wouldn't. But all that could be said for sure was that thinking of Paidin reminded Maomao of the tricks of the trade she taught her. She remembered that she wasn't allowed out of the room until she could perform it to her satisfaction, and at that point she had been half in tears. She trained until it became a natural reflex. Therefore, it was to say, Maomao had no fault in this. In other words, it meant. Maomao gulped down the saliva that pooled in her mouth. She parted her lips as if to invite him, then instead slipped her tongue into his mouth. Jinshi had a look of surprise and joy, but it didn't last long. His body twitched as a reaction, and his grip on Maomao loosened. Once again, Maomao was not at fault. It was out of her control. Maomao only presented Jinshi with the most exquisite skills of a professional of the red light district. How long was one beholden to a weathered old promise made as playful children? Aduo chuckled to herself. She sat on a cold rock in the garden, a blanket across her shoulders and a drink in her hand. The night air could truly chill here in the sandy capital. A good, strong alcohol was just what she needed. She'd already put Consort Lishu, all but feverish with tension, to bed. Now she was enjoying the drink she hadn't had a chance to savor before. I've no interest in anyone but you for my bride. Don't make promises you can't keep, she said in her mind. You don't have the authority. She knew perfectly well that some of his closest advisors had hounded him after she had lost the ability to bear children, and her own hands weren't exactly clean. She'd tried to get her kind, beautiful friend to be unfaithful. Her poor friend had been forced into a marriage with a partner who had been chosen for her, purely to perpetuate the family line. Why not ignore that situation, Aduo had thought? Why not rather be a flower that bloomed at the very crest of the nation? But it hadn't gone the way she'd imagined it would. The conversation had ended with her friend slapping Aduo's cheek as hard as she could and crying, "Don't mock me!" Aduo knew this young woman to be kind, to be beautiful, to be intelligent. She'd prepared a far better, a more fitting place for her, and yet it had only made her friend furious. Aduo just didn't understand the female heart. Maybe it was because she herself was no longer a woman, or maybe she had never understood it. In any case, she saw that she had badly wounded her friend's pride. She became a consort as an extension of friendship, without love, and then she'd borne a child. Aduo had always thought she was a rather twisted excuse for a woman, but apparently she still possessed what they called the maternal instinct. She had loved the child she bore at the cost of her own womb more than anything. The infant was wrinkled like a monkey. It waved its hands, so small that they looked like they would break the merest touch, and cried for milk. There was a nursemaid there, but Aduo had insisted on holding her own child. She'd tried to give it milk, but there wasn't enough to satisfy the baby. Aduo's body was no longer that of a woman. The infant was returned to the nursemaid. Racked with despair, Aduo thought only of her child. She thought only of how to help the tiny, vulnerable thing survive. And she reached a decision. They look so much alike. Her child and his uncle had been born at almost the same time. Concerned about her infant's failure to put on weight, Aduo had marshaled herself to go see her mother-in-law. You could switch them, and it seems like no one would know. She'd been half joking, but half serious, gauging which way the other woman took her. All of their various attendants and nursemaids had been dismissed from the room. You might be right. Could you take care of him, please? Her mother-in-law said, picking up Aduo's child. She removed his swaddling clothes, preparing to change his diaper. Meanwhile, Aduo accepted her brother-in-law and did the same, replacing his diaper with the one she'd brought along. Each of them had just given birth, and each of them felt like she was missing a piece of her heart. There was nothing in Ansha's eyes as she looked at her own child. Nobody seemed to notice, because Ansha constantly kept a smile on her face. But she looked at Aduo's baby with genuine warmth. Perhaps she found her son's child lovable, even as her husband seemed hateful to her. Perhaps that was why she said nothing, even when Aduo left and went back to her pavilion with Ansha's child in her arms. They exchanged the healthy, bouncing babies as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Later, the child that Aduo was raising died. Perhaps without that switch, it would have lived. Aduo mourned the loss, for she had come to love the child, but she was also glad to know that her own offspring was still alive. Ansha's child had died unloved by its own mother, with its rightful place usurped by its nephew, and all before it could even bewail its own fate. The death appeared to shake both Aduo and Ansha. The naughty little troublemaker, who had always given the serving woman such headaches, was now enough of a grown-up to sense it, but he was also young enough that he had to lash out a doctor was banished from the rear palace. Fate was a strange thing, though. That physician's adopted daughter was now her son's favorite. There were the princesses from foreign lands, the daughter of Empress Gyokyo's household, Consort Lishu, the girl in question, and, just for good measure, Suide as well. Aduo hadn't brought her along simply on a lark. She might have her issues, but when it came to bloodline, she was every bit as qualified as the others. Although if that had become known here in this place, it would have caused quite the commotion. Aduo chuckled again. A promise between playful children. That's all it had been, and yet he was intent on trying to keep it. Yet he hadn't been able to refuse a request from the little moon, little Yue. He had picked a flower from the vast garden that was the rear palace and made Yue a little brother. The reason he had sent Yue to the rear palace as a eunuch, was it a punishment for a promise broken? Or was it compassion, a way of giving him more chances to see Aduo? Whichever, Aduo took full advantage of the opportunity to tease the lovely eunuch each time he visited her. It was the most delightful thing. Ultimately, she had been dismissed from her position as one of the 4 ladies, but now she lived in a villa and listened to him complain. She wished the bearded old grump could send someone a little younger in his place. She was glad the children had been able to come live with her. Yes, youth was a wonderful thing, and it was so much fun to tease Suide. But there was something else Aduo must not forget. A second playful promise. A vow made when the question of whose status was appropriate for what had not yet entered her mind. Sure, why not? I might as well let you make me mother of a nation. And the idiot, he'd agreed immediately. Had he understood what he was really saying? And did he still remember it now that he had a great flower of the West for his empress? We'll just have to see what happens, Aduo said to herself, swirling the drink in her cup, resolving to watch over Yue and discover which flower he chose. End of Volume 5.